The first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was a ceiling tile. Cracked at one corner. A fluorescent light humming somewhere above him with the indifferent patience of a machine that does not know what year it is. He did not know how long he had been lying there. His shoulder told him it had been long enough. The pain was not sharp anymore. It had settled into something deeper, a slow, structural ache that lived beneath the muscle, inside the joint itself, the kind of pain that does not announce itself, it simply occupies. He was a champion. He had been a champion for 11 years. He had walked into that evening believing, without question, the way champions do, that his body was the most dangerous thing in any room he entered. He had been wrong. And somewhere in Los Angeles, a woman with groceries was walking home, and she had no idea he was here. 3 men. 3 separate years. 3 hospital beds in 3 different cities. A broken wrist in one. A dislocated shoulder in another. 3 fractured ribs in the last, the kind that make breathing feel like an argument the body is losing. None of them had gone looking for trouble. All of them would tell you that if you asked. And all of them, when the doctor filled out the incident report and asked the standard question, "What happened?" gave the same answer. Not the same words. The same silence underneath the words. The silence of a man who knows exactly what happened and understands, with a clarity that arrived too late to help him, that he cannot explain it in a way that does not make him the story. Because the story was not the fight. The story was what came before it. 7 words, said to a woman who had not asked to hear them. 7 words spoken by 3 men who made the same calculation at the same moment in 3 different years and reached the same catastrophically wrong conclusion. Her name was Linda Lee. And the men who forgot that she had won paid for it in ways that no amount of training, no championship record, no physical advantage could have prepared them for. What they said to her, you will know. But first, you need to understand what kind of man heard it. But to understand what happened to those 3 men, you have to go back. Not to the fights. Not to the hospitals. You have to go back to Seattle, Washington, 1961, to a high school gymnasium that smelled like floor wax and old rubber, where a girl named Linda Emery sat in the bleachers and watched a 19-year-old boy move in a way that she had never seen a human body move before. He was demonstrating Wing Chun. She did not know what Wing Chun was. She only knew that whatever was happening in front of her defied the ordinary rules of how a person occupies space. He did not perform. He simply moved, and the air in the room reorganized itself around him. She did not fall in love with his skill that afternoon. She fell in love with the stillness underneath it. Linda Emery was not the kind of girl who made impulsive decisions. She was thoughtful, deliberate, raised in a conservative household in Seattle where expectations were clear and deviation from them carried a social cost. When she told her family that she intended to marry Bruce Lee, a Chinese-American man in 1964 America, the cost arrived immediately. Her mother did not attend the wedding. Certain relatives stopped calling. Neighbors who had known her since childhood found reasons to look away when she passed. Linda absorbed all of it without a word of public complaint, not because she lacked the voice to object, but because she understood that her presence beside Bruce was already a statement louder than anything she could say. What the world did not see was what she built inside that marriage. She managed the household finances with the precision of an accountant. She typed Bruce's philosophical manuscripts from handwritten notes that only she could fully decipher. When Bruce suffered the severe spinal injury in 1970 that left him bedridden for months, it was Linda who managed the students, fielded the phone calls, maintained the income, and held the structure of their life together without allowing it to show on her face. There was a notebook she kept on the kitchen counter, 2 columns, one for household expenses, one for Bruce's philosophical writings that she transcribed so they would not be lost. Both columns were in her handwriting. Bruce called it the most important book in the house. She was not decoration. She was not a footnote. She was the fixed point around which everything else rotated. And some men, encountering that kind of quiet certainty in a woman, do not recognize it for what it is. They see stillness and mistake it for availability. They see calm and mistake it for permission. They look at Linda Lee standing in a parking lot or a hallway or the edge of a social gathering, and they see something that they believe, with a confidence that is about to be corrected, belongs in a different category than it does. That mistake had consequences. 3 times. And it always started the same way. The first time it happened was 1966. Los Angeles. A private training facility off Olympic Boulevard where serious men came to work seriously, the kind of gym that did not advertise, that you found only if someone who already knew about it decided you were worth knowing. The man was a professional wrestler with 11 years of competitive experience and a regional title that he carried the way certain men carry everything. Loudly, forward, as if the world owed him the space he was already occupying. He was not a villain. He was simply a man who had spent 11 years being the most physically formidable presence in every room he entered, and that experience had quietly convinced him that physical superiority was the same thing as social permission. Bruce was finishing a private session inside. Linda was waiting in the corridor, a narrow hallway with concrete walls and a water fountain that had not worked since February. She had brought a paperback. She was 3 chapters in, sitting on a wooden bench with her ankles crossed, entirely comfortable in her own company the way people are when they have never felt the need to perform contentment. The wrestler came out with 2 other men. They were loud the way men are loud when they are performing for each other. He saw Linda. He slowed. He said something to the men beside him and they laughed. Then he walked toward her, stood over the bench close enough that she would have had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and spoke. His voice was pleasant. His smile was wider than it needed to be. And what he said, 7 words arranged in a specific order that he believed was charming, landed in the hallway like something dropped from a height. Linda closed her book. Her expression was not anger, not embarrassment, not fear. It was the expression of a person who has just been handed something she did not order. Then the training room door opened. Bruce stepped into the hallway. He did not hear the words. He did not need to. He read Linda's face the way a man reads a room, instantly, completely, without requiring an explanation. He stood still for 2 full seconds, and the hallway, which had been loud a moment ago, became very quiet. The wrestler turned. He looked at Bruce, 5'7", 135 pounds, still in his training clothes, and made the calculation that a certain kind of man always makes when confronted with someone smaller. His smile did not leave his face. It should have. Bruce crossed the hallway and said 1 sentence, not to the wrestler, to Linda, asking if she was ready to leave. The wrestler decided the conversation was not finished. He reached out and put his hand on Bruce's shoulder. The gesture of a man who believes physical contact is punctuation. He was still forming the thought behind that gesture when his wrists stopped working. The wrestler sat down on the concrete floor beside the broken water fountain, cradling his right wrist against his chest, his face the color of chalk. Bruce picked up Linda's paperback from the bench. He handed it to her. They walked out. The wrestler was in a splint for 6 weeks. He told the doctor he had fallen during training. 3 years later, a journalist asked him, as a casual aside, whether he had ever crossed paths with Bruce Lee. The wrestler was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Once. I don't recommend the experience." He did not elaborate. The journalist moved on. But the answer was already complete. The second time it happened was Hong Kong, 1971. Bruce was at the peak of his international recognition, negotiating the films that would make him a global icon within 2 years. Linda was with him, as she always was, not as an accessory to his career, but as the person who understood it more completely than anyone else in the room. They were at an industry gathering in Kowloon, the kind of event crowded with people who needed to be seen by other people who needed to be seen. There was a martial artist there. Decorated. Internationally recognized. The kind of man who had spent enough years being celebrated that he had confused celebration with authority. He approached Linda while Bruce was across the room. He looked at her, this small, blonde American woman standing at the edge of a Hong Kong industry party, and decided, with the confidence of a man who has never once been wrong about his own appeal, that she would welcome the attention. He spoke loudly enough for the people around them to hear. He looked at Bruce across the room. Then he looked back at Linda. And he said it. The sentence. The same 7 words, dressed in a different language, carrying the same precise meaning. A woman like you deserves a real man. 7 words. Said with a smile. Said as a compliment, The way a certain kind of man packages an insult when he wants to deliver it without accountability. He was simply announcing in front of witnesses that Bruce Lee was insufficient. That Linda's life was a problem he was generously offering to solve. Linda did not respond. She looked at him with a patience that was not passive, a stillness that was not submission. The expression of a woman who knows, with a certainty she does not need to explain, exactly what is about to happen. Bruce arrived in 11 seconds. What everyone agreed on was that when he stopped beside Linda, the decorated martial artist stopped smiling, not because he was afraid, but because something in Bruce's eyes had rearranged the social mathematics of the room in a way his pride had not yet caught up with. Bruce said 2 sentences quietly, almost conversationally. He told the man what he had just done. Then he told the man what he was going to be given the opportunity to do next. The man laughed. A short laugh. Reflex more than humor. That second ran out. The confrontation lasted less time than the conversation that preceded it. The martial artist left the party before the hour was over. His shoulder took 4 months to fully recover. The pride took considerably longer, if it recovered at all. The third time was different. Not in outcome. In intent. It was 1968, Los Angeles. The man who approached Linda that evening was not a predator. He was a decorated stuntman with 20 years of industry experience who looked at Linda Lee and decided, with what he genuinely believed was warmth, to tell her what he thought. He was not trying to insult Bruce. He was trying to compliment Linda. That distinction mattered enormously to him. It did not matter at all in practice. He said it. The same 7 words. The same catastrophic miscalculation dressed in good intentions. Bruce crossed the room in 8 steps. He gave the man the space to understand what he had done. The stuntman did not understand it. He raised his voice slightly when he disagreed. That was the moment the evening changed. 3 fractured ribs. The stuntman told the emergency room physician he had fallen from a platform during rehearsal. The physician noted the injury pattern was inconsistent with that explanation. He wrote it down and moved on. The stuntman never corrected the record. Linda described these incidents only once, years after Bruce's death, in a private conversation with a close friend who later wrote it down. She said, "It was never about me. That was the thing none of them understood. They thought they were talking to me. They were never talking to me. They were talking about Bruce. And Bruce always heard exactly what they meant." 7 words. 3 men. 1 sentence that each of them believed was harmless. None of them walked out of that belief intact. None of it appeared in any newspaper. No police report. No official record of any kind. 3 men with broken bones and fractured pride, and not one of them filed a complaint. Not one of them picked up a phone. Not one of them sat across from a desk and told a person with a notepad what had actually happened to them that evening. And the reason was not fear of Bruce Lee, though fear may have been present. The reason was something more specific and more humiliating than fear. To file a complaint, a man must be able to state clearly what occurred. And to state clearly what occurred, he must be willing to explain what preceded it, what he said, to whom he said it, and why he believed at the time that saying it was without consequence. None of the 3 men were willing to have that conversation. What no one reported, and what history therefore did not record, was what happened after. Not in the hospitals. In the houses. In the small, ordinary hours after each of these evenings when Bruce and Linda came home and the door closed behind them and the city continued outside, indifferent, and they were alone with what had just happened. Bruce did not celebrate. He did not recount the details. He did not sit at the kitchen table and reconstruct the mechanics of what he had done the way certain men reconstruct victories to extend the pleasure of them. He sat quietly. Sometimes for a long time. Linda knew this about him, that every time he was forced to use what he had spent his life building, something inside him grew heavier. Not damaged. Heavier. There is a difference. A damaged thing is broken. A heavier thing still works, but it carries more than it did before, and Bruce Lee already carried more than most people understood. Linda would make tea. She would sit across from him. She would not ask him what he was thinking because she already knew. He was not thinking about the man. He was never thinking about the man. He was thinking about Brandon, their son, for years old during one of these incidents, sleeping in the next room, and what kind of world his son was going to have to learn to exist in. A world that kept producing men who looked at a woman standing quietly in a hallway and saw an opportunity rather than a person. A world that would one day look at Brandon and make its own set of calculations based on the shape of his face and the sound of his name. That was what the tea was for. Not comfort. Patience. The specific patience of two people who understand that the problem is larger than the evening, and the evening is over, and there is a child asleep in the next room who will need them both to still be standing in the morning. In 1975, 2 years after Bruce's death, a journalist interviewing Linda asked whether Bruce had ever been in real danger outside of his film work. She paused for a long moment. The pause was long enough that the journalist shifted in his seat. Then she said, "Bruce was never afraid of danger. He was afraid of injustice. There is a difference." She did not elaborate. The journalist wrote down the quote and moved to the next question. The audience does not get to move on that easily. There was a letter. Years later, one of the three men, the stuntman, the one who had meant no harm, the one who had extended his hand warmly and disagreed and raised his voice, wrote to Linda. He did not write to apologize for what he said. He wrote to apologize for not understanding at the time why it mattered. For not seeing until much later what the sentence actually contained. Linda kept the letter. She showed it to no one. But she kept it, which means something. In a life as carefully curated as Linda Lee's, nothing was kept without a reason. She never named the three men publicly. Not once. Not in any interview, not in any memoir, not in any public statement across the 5 decades she spent as Bruce Lee's widow, his archivist, his most precise and faithful interpreter. She knew their names. She simply decided that their names were not part of the story that mattered. The story that mattered was not what they did. It was what they revealed, without meaning to, about the world that had made them. Bruce Lee never spoke about any of it. Not to his students. Not to Dan Inosanto, his closest training partner and the man who understood his philosophy of combat more completely than anyone alive. Not to Ted Ashley at Warner Brothers. Not to Raymond Chow. Not to the journalists who spent years trying to extract the private man from behind the public legend. He gave hundreds of interviews in his short life and answered questions about philosophy, about race, about the film industry, about the nature of water and emptiness and the infinite. He never once mentioned a parking lot in Los Angeles or a hallway in Hong Kong or an industry event in Burbank where a man with good intentions made a catastrophically bad decision. Dan Inosanto spoke about Bruce's relationship to real confrontation once, years after Bruce's death, in an interview that received far less attention than it deserved. He said, "Bruce never started anything. But if you made it personal, and by personal I mean his family, there was no version of that conversation that ended the way you planned." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. What Bruce believed about strength was not the version printed on motivational posters. The private version, the one his students described in the years after his death, was more specific and less comfortable. Bruce believed that the highest use of physical skill was making physical confrontation unnecessary. And when it became necessary anyway, when a man in a hallway decided that Linda's stillness was an invitation, Bruce Lee did not respond with anger. Anger is a feeling. What Bruce responded with was precision. Precision is a decision. There is a difference between the two that most people never have cause to understand. 3 champions discovered that difference in 3 separate years. None of them went looking for it. All of them found it in the same place, standing too close to a woman who had not asked them to stand there, saying 7 words she had not asked to hear. The precision was always proportional. The minimum force necessary to solve the specific problem. Not a gram more. Not a gram less. The kind of economy that takes a lifetime to build and looks, to the man receiving it, like something that arrived from nowhere. Linda Lee stood at a martial arts ceremony in Los Angeles in 1998, 25 years after Bruce's death, surrounded by people who had come to honor a legend. Someone in the audience asked her, during the open remarks, what she believed Bruce's greatest achievement was. The room expected her to say Enter the Dragon, or Jeet Kune Do, or the philosophical writings that had outlasted the films and the fame and the grief and the decades. She thought for a moment. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when they understand that the answer is going to cost something. Then she said, "He made people feel like they existed. All of them. Even the ones who forgot that other people did." 3 men woke up in hospital beds because they forgot that Linda Lee existed. Not as a reflection of someone else's reputation. Not as an extension of someone else's identity. As a person. Complete. Sufficient. Belonging to no category that a stranger had the right to assign her. Bruce Lee spent exactly the force necessary to remind them of that fact. Not a word more. Not a movement more. The minimum required to solve the specific problem in front of him, which was never the man. It was always the idea the man represented. A fighter is not measured by how hard he can hit. He is measured by what makes him decide to. Bruce Lee decided the same thing every time. In a hallway. In a party. On a side street in the dark. He decided that Linda Lee existed. And he was willing to make that point to anyone who forgot it.